Daniel Hayes stares at his desk, absorbing the news. The last US-Russia nuclear treaty expires today. For over a decade, the New START treaty kept both arsenals in check, limiting deployed warheads. Inspection protocols allowed rare transparency, preventing misunderstandings and accidental escalation. February 5, 2026, marks a turning point. The agreement restraining global nuclear competition is gone. Daniel studies satellite imagery of Russian bases, noticing activity that could signal renewed readiness. Olga Petrov delivers a diplomatic statement, emphasizing responsibility without committing to limits. Mark Reynolds explains how absence of treaty restrictions opens doors to unchecked nuclear deployment. The narrator warns that nuclear peace relies on trust and verification, now fragile and uncertain. Daniel revisits the last inspection reports, tracing every missile silo and strategic facility meticulously. News headlines flash warnings of a new arms race, stirring public concern and speculation worldwide. Olga walks through a briefing hall, advisors flanking her. Calm but her expression unreadable. Daniel calculates how quickly arsenals could expand without oversight, weighing risk scenarios. Mark shows graphs illustrating how minor increases in deployed warheads can destabilize global balance. The narrator highlights stakes, billions in defense spending, millions of lives at risk, and miscalculation looming. Back channel. Cables hint at secret negotiations in Geneva, leaving intentions deliberately ambiguous. Daniel ponders public perception. Fear drives policy, but overreaction could intensify tension dangerously. Olga signals Russia's willingness to discuss new agreements while leaving terms vague, preserving flexibility. Satellite images show Siberian missile silos being refurbished, suggesting readiness for rapid deployment. Mark notes that technological upgrades can accelerate nuclear capability beyond what any treaty restricted. The narrator cautions, without verification, even minor misinterpretations can trigger catastrophic outcomes. Daniel reviews historical near misses, underlining how fragile global nuclear stability remains. European diplomats express concern, hinting that alliances may shape nuclear postures in unpredictable ways. Olga delivers statements at the UN, carefully balancing reassurance with strategic ambiguity. Mark highlights potential escalation scenarios, where a single misstep can cascade into large-scale competition. Daniel tracks global alert systems, sensing tension rising as intelligence reports remain inconclusive. The narrator observes that decades of careful diplomacy now hang by a thread, delicate and precarious. Satellite footage shows subtle troop and missile movements, signaling intent or routine operations unclear which. Daniel notes that small errors in interpretation could provoke disproportionate reactions from either side. Olga coordinates with advisors, weighing military readiness against international optics. Every move calculated. News analysts debate, is this the dawn of a new arms race or a temporary pause in cautious competition? Mark warns that delays in new agreements could accelerate nuclear modernization and expansion. Daniel reflects on human consequences. Public anxiety, globalo nesse, and silent dread in leadership circles. The narrator heightens suspense. The world waits, aware that the next actions may define decades to come. Satellite data reveals unusual storage activity, hinting at a potential change in deployment strategy. Olga maintains diplomatic meetings, carefully monitoring Washington's reactions and adjusting rhetoric. Mark analyzes warhead modernization trends, noting that prior treaties slowed but never halted expansion. Daniel imagines worst-case scenarios, calculating the potential impact of misjudgment or accidental launches. News footage shows anxious citizens, journalists, and world leaders, all grappling with uncertainty. The narrator reminds viewers that history has seen close calls, and the stakes could not be higher. Daniel stares at a map of global nuclear assets, the tension almost palpable in the dimly lit room. Satellite images highlight subtle changes in base activity, each one a potential harbinger of escalation. Olga convenes a crisis team, discussing contingencies while keeping strategic options deliberately opaque. Mark predicts scenarios where minor technological advances provoke immediate countermeasures. Daniel tracks intelligence updates, aware that a single misread signal could spark unintended consequences. The narrator reflects, decades of treaties and diplomacy may be undone in mere months if caution falters. News clips show discussions in parliaments and congresses worldwide, questioning readiness and strategy. Satellite images now indicate maintenance and upgrades in previously inactive silos, raising tension. Daniel notes the growing uncertainty and wonders which moves might be misinterpreted as threats. Olga sends coded instructions to advisors, ensuring Moscow maintains strategic flexibility without overt signals. Daniel studies global missile trajectories, realizing even slight miscalculations could trigger extreme responses. Olga consults her advisors quietly, debating how to signal strength without provoking unnecessary escalation. Mark warns that a minor technological edge could be interpreted as preparation for attack by the other side. Satellite feeds show subtle changes in missile silo heat signatures, raising alarms for analysts worldwide. Daniel calculates timelines. How fast could each nation deploy additional warheads if tensions spike? The narrator emphasizes, uncertainty is a weapon as dangerous as the missiles themselves. News outlets speculate on potential arms races in Asia and Europe, increasing global unease. Olga prepares statements designed to reassure allies, while leaving opponents guessing her true intentions. Mark explains that early warning systems are critical, but false signals could escalate situations unexpectedly. Daniel visualizes potential scenarios, each more terrifying than the last, and wonders what could prevent disaster. The narrator notes that human judgment remains the final safeguard against catastrophe. Satellite images capture unusual maintenance patterns at naval bases, potentially indicating missile readiness. Daniel reviews historical crises, comparing the current tension to Cold War flashpoints from decades ago. Olga's team reviews intelligence reports in real time, weighing each movement with extreme caution. Mark demonstrates simulations showing how rapid deployment decisions could spiral into global instability. Daniel feels the weight of responsibility, knowing that analysis alone cannot stop political escalation. News coverage highlights the fragile trust between nations, emphasizing how quickly it can unravel. The narrator warns viewers, nuclear strategy is a game where mistakes are often invisible until too late. Satellite images now suggest unusual logistics movements, though intent remains unclear. Daniel maps out how a misinterpreted maneuver could be seen as a first strike, escalating tensions instantly. Olga confers with military officials, balancing the optics of strength with the necessity of restraint. Mark calculates potential response timelines, showing how hours, not days, could decide outcomes. Daniel considers public reaction to possible news leaks, realizing perception can influence global policy drastically. The narrator emphasizes suspense. The world now operates without the safety net of binding treaty limits. News footage shows anxious global leaders meeting behind closed doors, signaling growing concern. Satellite feeds capture subtle convoy movements near strategic bases, raising questions about intentions. Daniel notes how a single misinterpreted action could cascade into a chain of irreversible consequences. Olga studies missile exercise schedules, ensuring every move is calculated to avoid provocation. Mark points out that nuclear modernization programs can unintentionally create instability. Daniel imagines multiple what-if scenarios, each one more chilling than the last, tracing potential outcomes. The narrator reminds viewers that history is filled with close calls, and today's stakes are equally high. Satellite imagery reveals upgraded communication lines, enabling faster coordination during crises. Daniel analyzes these changes, trying to predict how they could affect global decision-making under pressure. Olga and her team debate whether transparency or ambiguity will better secure Russia's strategic interests. Mark shows models illustrating how small increases in readiness can provoke countermeasures globally. Daniel visualizes the human impact. Citizens unaware of the risks, yet living under potential threat. The narrator pauses. Diplomacy now moves alongside military readiness, in a delicate and dangerous balance. News anchors report growing unease across continents, signaling that the treaty expiration is more than symbolic. Satellite data reveals potential hidden deployments, prompting analysts to reassess prior assumptions. Daniel realizes that interpretation of such data is subjective and could have global consequences. Olga consults allies privately, signaling coordination without committing publicly to any action. Mark highlights a key danger. Rapid technological advancement can outpace diplomatic safeguards. Daniel maps out potential flashpoints, considering both intent and the risk of accidental escalation. The narrator warns, the world now relies on judgment, communication, and careful calculation more than treaties. Satellite feeds show subtle but systematic changes in military positioning, feeding global speculation. Daniel notes that even small missteps in analysis could trigger a cascade of reactions. Olga prepares a strategic statement to the UN, balancing caution, reassurance, and calculated ambiguity. Mark predicts that any misinterpreted signals could lead to accelerated deployment or defensive posturing. Daniel reflects, decades of relative stability are now uncertain. A new era of risk has begun. The narrator leaves viewers on edge. The treaty is gone, but the choices and consequences are just unfolding. Daniel examines military exercise reports, noticing patterns that suggest accelerated readiness on both sides. Olga holds back-channel discussions with European allies, balancing transparency with strategic ambiguity. Mark warns that even minor technological improvements could be interpreted as preparation for first strikes. Satellite imagery shows unusual activity near missile storage facilities, feeding analysts uncertainty. Daniel calculates the time required to mobilize additional warheads, a sobering exercise in precision. The narrator observes that global stability now hinges on both judgment and restraint, not treaties. News outlets speculate about a possible arms race, raising public awareness and unease simultaneously. Olga confers privately with military planners, evaluating options without signaling intent to foreign observers. Mark shows simulations where small changes in posture could cascade into rapid escalation worldwide. Daniel imagines scenarios where misinterpretation leads to deployment, even without actual hostility. Satellite data hints at covert operations, though the details remain obscured from public view. Daniel notes that verification is impossible, leaving decision-makers to rely on incomplete intelligence. The narrator warns viewers, uncertainty can be as dangerous as aggression when millions of lives hang in the balance. News reports emphasize diplomatic tensions, highlighting a sense of urgency across international capitals. Olga reviews historical treaties, understanding that ambiguity can serve both strategy and caution. Mark predicts that escalation could occur incrementally, with each side responding to perceived threats. Daniel visualizes the human consequences. Populations unaware, yet vulnerable to policy decisions. Satellite feeds detect subtle supply movements to strategic bases, adding layers of speculation. Daniel calculates the speed at which miscommunication could become miscalculation, a frightening reality. Olga meets with advisors, weighing timing and messaging in a complex geopolitical chess game. Mark highlights that nuclear posture alone can provoke countermeasures without overt aggression. Daniel considers public messaging. Fear could pressure governments, but overreaction risks global instability. The narrator observes, the expiration of this treaty creates a landscape of uncertainty and risk unseen in decades. Satellite imagery captures new construction near previously dormant launch sites, raising further questions. Daniel analyzes potential flashpoints, considering how each move could be misread by international counterparts. Olga ensures communications remain secure, avoiding leaks that could spark political panic. Mark models scenarios in which rapid deployment could escalate into unintentional confrontation. Daniel visualizes the fragile balance of deterrence, now reliant solely on calculation and restraint. News coverage shows global leaders reacting cautiously, but uncertainty fuels speculation and tension. The narrator emphasizes suspense. The world now navigates without the anchor of binding treaties. Satellite analysis shows increased security at command centers, suggesting preparations without confirming intent. Daniel reflects on past incidents where near misses brought nations to the brink of disaster. Olga balances diplomacy with strategy, weighing statements that could calm or provoke international partners. Mark points out that technological acceleration in nuclear capabilities could outpace diplomacy dangerously. Daniel traces the ripple effects. Even a single misjudged signal could escalate beyond control. The narrator reminds viewers that human decision-making remains the last safeguard in a high-stakes world. Satellite images show patterns of routine and unusual activity, leaving analysts guessing at true intentions. Daniel considers worst-case outcomes, imagining scenarios where rapid escalation becomes inevitable. Olga coordinates with intelligence agencies, maintaining a delicate balance of information control. Mark warns that a misinterpreted signal or movement could trigger a chain reaction of counter-deployments. Daniel examines public and private statements from leaders, seeking clues to underlying strategies. The narrator heightens tension. Every observation, calculation, and decision could ripple across continents. Satellite data hints at new deployments of strategic systems, though clarity is elusive. Daniel worries that incomplete intelligence could lead to decisions that escalate unknowingly. Olga prepares briefings, carefully controlling narrative without sacrificing operational security. Mark models global consequences, showing how local decisions could have worldwide ramifications. Daniel ponders how history may judge these moments of uncertainty when the world teetered on edge. The narrator warns that even without overt hostility, subtle maneuvers could provoke reactions. Satellite feeds show increased activity at multiple bases simultaneously, raising alarm and curiosity. Daniel contemplates the looming question: how long before uncertainty becomes irreversible action? Daniel analyzes new satellite patterns, noting simultaneous maintenance at multiple missile sites, a rare occurrence. Olga consults secretly with allies, discussing contingency plans while avoiding public scrutiny or panic. Mark warns that each technological upgrade could provoke subtle but significant countermeasures worldwide. Daniel considers the psychological weight on decision makers, balancing fear, calculation, and global stakes. Satellite feeds reveal movements near command bunkers, their purpose ambiguous but unsettling to analysts. The narrator emphasizes suspense. Nuclear strategy now unfolds in a world without verifiable limits. News reports speculate that strategic ambiguity may push the world closer to unforeseen escalation. Olga prepares statements intended to reassure allies while maintaining operational flexibility. Mark models scenarios showing that even minor changes in readiness could trigger rapid, global responses. Daniel reviews past crises, where communication errors almost led to catastrophe, reflecting on present risk. Satellite imagery shows increased logistical activity, feeding speculation about possible future deployments. Daniel tracks early warning systems, knowing that false alarms could ignite chain reactions. The narrator highlights the precarious balance. Decades of treaties now replaced by uncertainty. News footage shows global leaders convening, their expressions betraying concern over strategic ambiguity. Olga reviews intelligence summaries, considering how to signal restraint without appearing weak. Mark warns that nuclear modernization programs, while defensive in nature, can still escalate tension. Daniel imagines worst-case scenarios, calculating the ripple effect of minor misinterpretations. Satellite feeds hint at covert equipment transfers, though details remain obscured from public knowledge. Daniel notes that misreading signals now carries higher stakes than any prior diplomatic challenge. Olga coordinates with senior officials, balancing diplomacy, optics, and operational readiness simultaneously. Mark highlights the speed of modern missile deployment, where hours, not days, could matter decisively. Daniel visualizes the human impact. Civilians unaware, yet potentially caught in the crossfire of decisions. The narrator warns that judgment and restraint are now humanity's last line of defense. Satellite images show new construction at strategic locations, feeding analysts' curiosity and concern. Daniel evaluates potential flashpoints, considering how minor movements could be misinterpreted globally. Olga consults intelligence teams, ensuring that sensitive information guides measured decisions. Mark predicts that each small escalation could provoke a series of responses, escalating uncontrollably. Daniel studies public and private communications, searching for subtle cues about intentions. The narrator emphasizes suspense. The absence of treaties magnifies the consequences of every choice. Satellite imagery hints at hidden deployments, leaving analysts uncertain and increasingly anxious. Daniel calculates response timelines, considering the consequences of rapid escalation under uncertainty. Olga meets with advisors, weighing each word of diplomatic messaging for maximum strategic effect. Mark demonstrates how minor changes in posture can ripple across nations, sparking misinterpretations. Daniel visualizes the thin margin between routine operations and crises, a line now dangerously blurred. News reports highlight growing global concern over the lack of verification and oversight mechanisms. The narrator reminds viewers that even today, accidents or miscalculations could spiral out of control. Satellite feeds show unusual coordination at remote missile bases, leaving room for speculation. Daniel considers how incomplete intelligence may inadvertently trigger misjudged decisions. Olga strategizes about how to maintain credibility while preventing unintended escalation. Mark warns that rapid technological upgrades can outpace diplomacy, increasing the risk of miscalculations. Daniel visualizes chains of cause and effect, realizing how quickly tension can compound worldwide. The narrator heightens suspense. Every analysis, every observation, could influence global outcomes or preparations, though the purpose remains speculative. Daniel reflects on how history may judge these moments. When caution faced the ultimate test, Olga reviews potential negotiation windows, calculating when diplomacy could prevent escalation. Mark highlights that small misinterpretations could rapidly snowball into irreversible decisions. Daniel tracks early warning alerts, aware that false positives now carry extreme consequences. The narrator reminds viewers that in a world without treaty constraints, perception is as potent as reality. Satellite feeds capture unexpected equipment movements, prompting analysts to reassess assumptions. Daniel calculates the response capacity of both nations, noting the razor-thin margin for error. Olga coordinates internally, maintaining control over sensitive information while weighing strategy. Mark warns that a minor error in judgment could trigger a global chain reaction, unseen until it's too late. Daniel visualizes potential flashpoints, each one more unsettling than the last, with stakes rising steadily. News reports show anxious global leaders, emphasizing that uncertainty now dominates diplomatic discourse. The narrator heightens tension. Decisions made behind closed doors now carry global implications. Satellite imagery shows simultaneous maintenance at multiple bases, unusual enough to cause concern. Daniel studies how misreading routine activity might escalate tensions unpredictably. Olga consults advisors about the risks of signaling restraint versus appearing weak to rivals. Mark models scenarios in which escalation could accelerate faster than diplomacy can respond. Daniel notes that the world's reliance on human judgment has never been more critical. The narrator underscores suspense. The expiration of the treaty leaves the future unpredictable. Satellite feeds show subtle logistical movements, feeding speculation among intelligence teams. Daniel reflects on the potential consequences of delayed decisions or misinterpreted data. Olga prepares statements that thread the needle between reassurance and strategic ambiguity. Mark emphasizes that even without overt aggression, posture and readiness alone can provoke reactions. Daniel visualizes global public response, unaware but potentially affected by strategic choices. The narrator warns viewers. One misstep could set in motion a chain of events that no treaty could halt. Satellite images reveal upgrades and enhancements at strategic sites, though the purpose is unclear. Daniel studies multiple what-if scenarios, mapping potential escalations across continents. Olga monitors internal communications, ensuring strategic messaging is consistent and precise. Mark demonstrates how technological acceleration could unintentionally destabilize global stability. Daniel considers worst-case outcomes, understanding how quickly minor incidents could escalate. The narrator heightens suspense. Humanity now balances on a razor's edge of calculation and uncertainty. Satellite data hints at unknown deployments, leaving analysts with more questions than answers. Daniel evaluates response options, each carrying immense consequences for both nations and the world. Olga consults senior advisors about optimal timing for diplomatic interventions to avoid misperception. Mark warns that nuclear posture now has unprecedented strategic weight, influencing global tension. Daniel visualizes the psychological pressure on decision-makers, managing uncertainty and fear. The narrator reminds viewers, in a post-treaty world, restraint is fragile and easily tested. Satellite imagery shows heightened activity at multiple missile and command sites simultaneously. Daniel considers how a single misjudgment could trigger unintended escalation in hours or days. Olga evaluates the balance between signaling strength and projecting stability to allies and rivals. Mark models potential escalation chains, showing how one action could cascade into a global crisis. Daniel reflects on history, noting that similar periods of uncertainty once nearly led to disaster. The narrator emphasizes suspense. Each moment, each decision, could shape decades of global security. Satellite feeds reveal subtle yet significant activity, leaving intelligence teams debating intent. Daniel studies missile readiness, understanding that perception now outweighs actual capability. Olga coordinates closely with European and Asian partners, navigating alliances without revealing strategy. Mark warns that the combination of technology, uncertainty, and human judgment creates unprecedented risk. Daniel visualizes potential scenarios where minor misunderstandings could escalate into crises. The narrator reminds viewers that, without treaties, the safety net of verification is gone entirely. Satellite data hints at hidden logistical operations, leaving analysts uncertain of true intent. Daniel calculates the possible impact of each decision, recognizing the weight of even minor errors. Olga prepares communications that balance reassurance, ambiguity, and strategic signaling. Mark highlights that minor escalations can rapidly accelerate global competition without warning. Daniel studies early warning protocols, knowing that false signals could trigger irreversible reactions. The narrator heightens tension. Decades of strategic stability now rely on judgment alone. Satellite imagery shows synchronized movements at multiple strategic locations, raising concern. Daniel considers the psychological and political consequences of each potential misstep. Olga evaluates timing for diplomatic outreach, balancing urgency with strategic advantage. Mark warns that technological advancement alone can provoke responses, even without hostile intent. Daniel visualizes cascading effects of small misjudgments, stretching across nations and alliances. The narrator emphasizes suspense. The world now walks a fine line without treaty constraints. Satellite feeds capture unusual maintenance patterns, leaving analysts questioning intent. Daniel reviews contingency plans, imagining scenarios where diplomacy and caution might fail. Olga monitors messaging, ensuring that statements neither provoked nor embolden rivals. Mark models the speed of potential escalation, showing how rapidly events could spiral beyond control. Daniel considers the invisible weight of decision-making in a world suddenly stripped of safety nets. The narrator reminds viewers that minor signals can have monumental global consequences. Satellite imagery shows simultaneous equipment upgrades, suggesting preparations without confirmed intent. Daniel notes how uncertainty now amplifies even routine military maneuvers. Olga confers with intelligence advisors, calculating the best balance of transparency and strategy. Mark emphasizes that escalation could begin subtly, unnoticed, until it becomes a larger problem. Daniel visualizes potential outcomes, realizing the fragile threads connecting restraint and crises. The narrator heightens suspense. One misinterpreted signal could define the coming decade. Satellite feeds hint at unknown deployments, leaving global analysts guessing at intentions. Daniel calculates the timelines for potential mobilizations, understanding the razor-thin margin for error. Olga consults with allies quietly, ensuring that coordination does not inadvertently escalate tension. Mark warns that technological speed now challenges the slow pace of diplomacy and negotiation. Daniel imagines cascading reactions, each one magnifying the stakes of every choice. The narrator underscores suspense. A world without treaty limits now relies on judgment alone. Satellite imagery shows patterns of simultaneous activity across multiple strategic sites. Daniel notes that even minor miscalculations could trigger disproportionate responses globally. Olga balances diplomacy with operational readiness, carefully threading messages to allies and rivals. Mark models escalation scenarios, demonstrating how minor actions could spark widespread reactions. Daniel reflects on how history nearly crossed this threshold before, emphasizing current fragility. The narrator emphasizes suspense. Humanity now stands at a precarious intersection of calculation and risk. Satellite data suggests movements of unknown assets, leaving analysts with more questions than answers. Daniel evaluates the consequences of delayed decision-making, weighing speed against accuracy. Olga monitors internal communications, ensuring strategic messaging aligns with operational reality. Mark warns that even absent overt hostility, posture and readiness alone could provoke reactions. Daniel visualizes potential worst-case scenarios, considering cascading consequences of misinterpretation. The narrator heightens tension. Every choice now carries profound implications for global stability. Satellite imagery shows upgrades and movement at multiple bases simultaneously, feeding speculation. Daniel calculates timelines for potential escalation, recognizing that hours could decide global fate. Olga consults with advisors, maintaining balance between signaling strength and projecting stability. Mark predicts that minor missteps now carry amplified consequences, altering global strategic equilibrium. Daniel reflects on the invisible human pressure behind every decision, weighing risk and consequence. The narrator underscores suspense. Decisions made today may define decades of nuclear strategy. Satellite feeds hint at undisclosed deployments, leaving global intelligence agencies on high alert. Daniel visualizes global outcomes, each scenario growing more tense and uncertain than the last. Olga coordinates carefully with allies, maintaining cohesion while avoiding unintended escalation. Mark warns that in the absence of treaties, perception and signaling may outweigh actual capability. Daniel stares at his monitors, the weight of uncertainty heavy. The treaty is gone, but the consequences are only beginning. Daniel studies real-time satellite feeds, noticing patterns that suggest heightened alert across multiple regions simultaneously. Olga evaluates intelligence reports, trying to determine whether movements are precautionary or precursors to escalation. Mark warns that modern missile technology allows responses in minutes, compressing decision-making timelines dangerously. Daniel visualizes global consequences. If misinterpretation leads to rapid deployment, a cascade of potential disasters. The narrator emphasizes suspense. The expiration of the treaty has removed decades of safeguards in an instant. News footage shows leaders in emergency meetings, their faces revealing concern and careful calculation under pressure. Satellite imagery detects new logistical activity, raising alarms for analysts who struggle to read intent. Daniel calculates how quickly false alarms could spiral into irreversible consequences. A frightening reality. Olga coordinates secret consultations with allies, balancing strategic ambiguity with reassurance. Mark highlights that posture and signaling now carry as much weight as actual capabilities, magnifying tension. Daniel considers the human element. Decisions made in anxiety and uncertainty could define global history. Satellite feeds show simultaneous activity at multiple launch and command facilities, feeding speculation. The narrator warns viewers, one misstep could trigger cascading effects, unseen until they become critical. Daniel maps out potential flashpoints, noting how small errors could escalate uncontrollably across nations. Olga prepares public statements, threading a needle between transparency, caution, and deterrence. Mark models escalation chains, where minor misinterpretations could trigger a rapid, global sequence of actions. Daniel imagines worst-case outcomes, considering both accidental and deliberate triggers for escalation. Satellite imagery reveals upgraded communication systems, enabling faster coordination and faster potential miscalculations. Daniel notes that even routine drills could be misread as offensive posturing by rivals. Olga reviews diplomatic messaging strategies, ensuring statements project stability without revealing weaknesses. Mark predicts that rapid technological advancement could destabilize previously stable deterrent structures. Daniel visualizes scenarios where civilian populations are unaware, yet directly affected by strategic decisions. The narrator heightens suspense. The absence of treaty verification leaves nations navigating uncertainty alone. Satellite feeds detect unusual supply and logistics activity, though intent remains ambiguous and concerning. Daniel reflects on historical near misses, realizing the fragile margin separating stability from disaster. Olga consults intelligence teams, balancing risk, timing, and messaging across multiple channels. Mark warns that minor escalations can snowball quickly in an interconnected global system. Daniel evaluates potential outcomes of misjudged signals, each one increasingly severe. Satellite imagery shows simultaneous construction and maintenance, adding ambiguity to global interpretations. Daniel notes that the world now relies solely on judgment, communication, and measured restraint. Olga strategizes diplomatic outreach windows, balancing urgency with strategic advantage and caution. Mark demonstrates how technological capabilities compress the time for measured decision-making. Dangerously, Daniel visualizes cascading reactions from minor miscalculations, each ripple magnifying stakes globally. The narrator underscores suspense. Humanity now walks a razor's edge of uncertainty without treaty limits. Satellite feeds hint at hidden or undisclosed deployments, increasing tension and speculation worldwide. Daniel calculates response times and potential escalation chains, aware of how fast a crisis could unfold. Olga monitors messaging closely, ensuring coordination between allies while maintaining operational security. Mark warns that misread signals or accidental escalations could produce consequences beyond control. Daniel considers how public perception might influence decision-making, amplifying risk unknowingly. Satellite imagery shows simultaneous logistical movements at multiple strategic sites, fueling concern. Daniel notes that incomplete intelligence heightens the risk of misjudged reactions and rapid escalation. Olga evaluates diplomatic messaging, threading between reassurance, deterrence, and ambiguity. Mark models escalation scenarios where minor missteps could trigger a global crisis. Daniel visualizes global flashpoints, each with potential for conflict magnified by The narrator heightens suspense. The world now operates in uncertainty, where every move carries weight. Satellite feeds capture synchronized activity across command and launch facilities, puzzling analysts. Daniel reflects on past incidents where miscommunication nearly led to disaster, fearing history might repeat. Olga coordinates behind the scenes, balancing diplomacy, operational readiness, and strategic ambiguity. Mark warns that technological speed can outpace diplomacy, amplifying stakes and shortening response windows. Daniel considers worst-case scenarios where small errors cascade into catastrophic outcomes. Satellite imagery shows unusual transport activity, hinting at preparations with unknown intent. Daniel notes that human judgment is now the final safeguard against rapid escalation. Olga prepares statements that project calm, stability, and strategic resolve simultaneously. Mark highlights how posture alone could provoke countermeasures in a highly tense global environment. Daniel visualizes cascading consequences, where one misread signal could spiral out of control. The narrator emphasizes suspense. The world now relies on decision-making under extreme uncertainty. Satellite feeds hint at previously undisclosed deployments, leaving analysts uncertain about next steps. Daniel calculates timelines for potential escalations, noting how quickly events could become irreversible. Olga monitors allies' reactions, ensuring communication aligns with strategy and avoids provocation. Mark warns that minor miscalculations can have global consequences in a post-treaty landscape. Daniel visualizes the tension stretching across nations, a silent pressure threatening to erupt unpredictably. Satellite imagery shows concurrent upgrades and maintenance at multiple sites, raising questions about intent. Daniel considers how quickly routine operations could be misinterpreted, triggering escalation. Olga consults with senior advisors, evaluating strategic risk against timing and global perception. Mark models scenarios where minor actions can create chain reactions, magnifying global instability. Daniel reflects on the immense responsibility resting on decision-makers, aware of the human costs. The narrator heightens suspense. The absence of treaties now forces judgment, perception, and restraint to bear ultimate weight. Satellite feeds detect coordinated movements that could signal readiness without clarity of purpose. Daniel evaluates multiple what-if chains of escalation, each scenario more chilling than the last. Olga balances signaling strength against avoiding provocation, maintaining delicate diplomatic maneuvering. Mark warns that technological acceleration compresses reaction windows dangerously, increasing global risk. Daniel visualizes cascading effects of misjudgments, each action magnified in a tense global environment. The narrator underscores suspense. The world now walks a precarious line with unprecedented stakes. Satellite imagery shows simultaneous activity at multiple command centers, leaving analysts puzzled and cautious. Daniel considers the psychological weight on leaders making decisions under uncertainty and fear. Olga coordinates carefully with allies, threading diplomacy and operational readiness to avoid escalation. Mark models potential global consequences, showing how small miscalculations could spiral unpredictably. Daniel visualizes public and political responses, noting how perception could magnify tensions unintentionally. Satellite feeds reveal unusual patterns in supply and logistics, feeding analysts speculation and concern. Daniel calculates risk scenarios where seconds could determine whether escalation occurs or is avoided. Olga evaluates messaging strategies, ensuring reassurance is balanced with ambiguity to prevent misperception. Mark emphasizes that posture and readiness now outweigh treaty constraints in influencing international reactions. Daniel visualizes cascading chains of cause and effect, each decision carrying amplified global consequences. The narrator heightens suspense. With no treaty limits, judgment and communication have never been more critical. Satellite imagery hints at undisclosed deployments, leaving analysts with a sense of looming uncertainty. Daniel reviews potential flashpoints, imagining how minor incidents could trigger widespread tension. Olga monitors internal communications, ensuring strategic messaging aligns with operational realities. Mark warns that even minor missteps could trigger rapid escalation in a highly sensitive global environment. Daniel visualizes cascading global outcomes, each scenario more tense and unpredictable than the last. Satellite feeds show simultaneous logistical and command movements, raising questions about intent. Daniel reflects on history, noting how close calls almost led to catastrophe. Emphasizing current stakes, Olga coordinates quiet diplomacy, threading messaging to allies without provoking unintended responses. Mark models chains of escalation, showing how minor misunderstandings could trigger global consequences. Daniel considers the invisible pressures on decision-makers, weighing risk, perception, and potential fallout. The narrator underscores suspense. The absence of treaty safeguards leaves humanity reliant on judgment alone. Satellite imagery shows ongoing simultaneous activity, feeding global speculation and uncertainty. Daniel calculates response timelines, recognizing how quickly decisions could determine global fate. Olga evaluates optimal timing for diplomatic outreach, balancing risk and strategic advantage. Mark warns that technological and communication speed may now outpace diplomacy dangerously. Daniel visualizes cascading effects of misjudgments, realizing the fragility of current global stability. Satellite feeds hinted undisclosed operational movements, heightening tension and curiosity among analysts. Daniel calculates the speed at which misinterpretation could spiral into rapid escalation. Olga monitors messaging carefully, threading reassurance with strategic ambiguity to avoid provocation. Mark emphasizes that posture alone could influence global reactions in this post-treaty environment. Daniel visualizes global flashpoints, each one magnified by misperception and heightened readiness. The narrator heightens suspense. Every decision now carries amplified stakes. In an unpredictable world, satellite imagery detects new deployments at multiple bases, leaving analysts uncertain of intent. Daniel considers worst-case scenarios, imagining cascading consequences across continents and populations. Olga consults advisors about signaling restraint while maintaining credibility and strategic leverage. Mark models escalation pathways, showing how minor errors could produce major global consequences. Daniel visualizes the thin line separating stability from crises, aware of the stakes in every decision. Satellite feeds capture subtle yet significant activity, fueling speculation about intentions and preparedness. Daniel reflects on how human judgment is now the final safeguard against global miscalculation. Olga prepares communications balancing reassurance, strategic ambiguity, and operational transparency. Mark warns that even absent direct hostility, posture, readiness, and perception may provoke reactions. Daniel visualizes cascading consequences, recognizing the stakes now extend across nations and populations. The narrator heightens suspense. Humanity's survival now rests on careful judgment under uncertainty. Satellite imagery shows simultaneous upgrades at multiple strategic sites, raising further questions. Daniel calculates the possible impact of each decision, knowing small errors could trigger chain reactions. Olga coordinates with allies discreetly, maintaining balance while avoiding provocation or misinterpretation. Mark models how rapid escalation could occur even in the absence of overt conflict. Daniel visualizes potential crises, each amplified by technological acceleration and misperception. The narrator emphasizes suspense. The world now navigates without treaty safeguards, reliant on judgment alone. Satellite feeds hint at hidden deployments, leaving analysts uncertain and tense. Daniel evaluates timelines for potential escalation, understanding how quickly minor errors could escalate. Olga monitors diplomatic channels, threading messaging to minimize risk while maintaining strategic strength. Mark warns that posture and readiness could now dictate reactions as much as capability itself. Daniel visualizes cascading chains of misinterpretation and reaction, each carrying enormous consequences. Satellite imagery detects simultaneous movements across strategic locations, leaving analysts uneasy. Daniel reflects on the immense human responsibility behind each decision made in uncertainty. Olga coordinates discreetly with allies, balancing strategic signaling with operational discretion. Mark models scenarios showing how technological speed could shorten decision windows dangerously. Daniel visualizes cascading global outcomes, each more tense and unpredictable than the last. The narrator heightens suspense. Humanity now relies on judgment, caution, and perception alone. Satellite feeds capture unexpected activity, raising questions about readiness, intent, and potential escalation. Daniel calculates potential chains of consequence, realizing how quickly events could spiral out of control. Olga evaluates messaging timing, balancing urgency with careful strategy to avoid provoking adversaries. Mark warns that even minor missteps could trigger disproportionate global reactions. Daniel visualizes cascading consequences, where perception may outweigh reality in influencing actions. Satellite imagery shows simultaneous activity, leaving global intelligence uncertain of true intentions. Daniel considers worst-case scenarios, mapping potential escalations and their global impact. Olga coordinates with advisors, threading strategic messaging while avoiding provocation. Mark emphasizes that posture and signaling may now determine escalation risk more than treaties or capability. Daniel visualizes the fragile balance of global stability, aware that every decision carries immense weight. The narrator underscores suspense. The expiration of the treaty marks a new era of uncertainty and risk. Satellite feeds hint at undisclosed deployments, leaving analysts guessing at intentions and capabilities. Daniel calculates the consequences of misjudged actions, noting how rapidly events could spiral. Olga monitors internal and allied communications, ensuring strategic coordination without escalation. Mark warns that technological and strategic acceleration may leave little room for deliberate diplomacy. Daniel stares at the global map, tension mounting. The treaty is gone, but the decisions, risks, and unknowns are only beginning to unfold. As the world holds its breath, the treaty is gone, yet the choices, the signals, and the unknowns remain, stretching far beyond any single map or report. In this silence between decisions, every leader, every analyst, and every citizen becomes part of an invisible tension, where restraint may weigh more than power. Perhaps the world will navigate this uncertainty with caution, or perhaps the shadows of misjudgment will leave their mark. What would you decide if the weight of millions rested on your next move?